Since the process of creation works on inclusion and empowerment, the greater the number of people who are empowered through their engagement in the process of creation, the more powerful we all are. The broader our approach to empowerment and inclusion is, the closer we are to the realization of the Enlightenment process. This conclusion resonates with a variety of perspectives that have become increasingly visible and vocal lately in connection with the perceived deficit of democracy. These perspectives, such as deliberative, direct, and participatory democracy, critique liberal democracy, liberal democratic theory, and the elitist practices of modern representative democracy. They also advocate broad empowerment of all members of society, their inclusion in the process of democratic decision. Demands for broad empowerment are not unproblematic. They raise a number of important theoretical and practical issues concerning the relationship between broad participation in decision making and hierarchies. In other words, between hierarchical and non hierarchical interactions, between leaders and those they purport to lead. These issues have been examined in detail elsewhere, and do not need to be examined here. There is one question, however, that should be addressed for the purposes of this article. Is the continued existence of hierarchies an impediment to the realization of the Enlightenment project and the elimination of exclusion and domination? There are quite a few theoretical perspectives that address the issue of the continued existence of hierarchies. While these perspectives serve as valuable source of ideas, most, if not all of them, have one common problem. They do not incorporate the process of creation into their frame of vision. And as a result, they see hierarchies and networks as ontologically separate and opposed to each other. In addressing the problem of hierarchies and leadership, one should keep in mind that hierarchies and leaders are not fortuitous and arbitrary phenomena. They're not some tragic aberration in evolution, as many opponents of hierarchies argue. They're a product of this evolution. Non-hierarchical interactions require regulation. Regulation represents a level of organization that is more powerful than that of the entities it regulates or their sum total. And a more powerful level of organization means hierarchy. The principal function of regulation is reflective. In other words, it is non-local and capable of detaching from and reflecting on the entire system and all the interactions of the subsystem. Because of their location, liminal space between the system and its environment, hierarchies and leaders that perform this function are in the position to reflect critically, that is, observing the system and also themselves as a part of the system at the same time, on all interactions among the agents and subsystems of the system. The latter, by virtue of their position, can reflect only on local interactions. For this reason, leaders are in the position to achieve new and more powerful levels of organization created by all interactions within the system, as well as recognize, promote, and facilitate the consolidation of these levels of organization. Their role in this capacity has nothing to do with command and control. That is, transmitting decisions from top down and overseeing their implementation. Leaders must appreciate the enormous creative power of local interaction and be closely attuned to their variation. Since they rely or supervene so much of what they do in these local interactions, they should promote, regulate, and facilitate, not obstruct and disrupt them by trying to dominate. It is a sensitive, delicate, highly creative role that involves both cooperation and two-way adaptation. This role has an enormous. Since systems constantly evolve, they require integration of their local and global operations. This integration is a function of leadership. In order to integrate local and global levels, Leaders must express operations on the global regulatory level in terms of local interaction. This task requires the creation of a level of organization that has sufficient power to incorporate both local and global operation system as its particular cases. It is a highly creative role that ensures continued evolution of a system. The relationship between the leaders and those they lead cannot be one of them. It requires cooperation and close interaction in the common creative work that sustains the evolution of the entire system. Such cooperation can only be effective if there is a balance between hierarchical and non hierarchical interactions, between hierarchies and networks. Leaders should not see their role as that of ultimate arbiters whose word is final. Far from it. Rather, their role is that of co creators in the common enterprise of creating new levels of organization and ensuring the survival and evolution of the entire system. The evolution of human systems finally depends on mechanisms and procedures for making decisions on the basis of rational and objective criteria. The perspective that incorporates the process of creation and as its focal point offers the possibility for an inclusive and non-relativistic validation of knowledge and decision making. There is an extensive body of literature that discusses inclusive ways of validating knowledge and making decisions. Although it documents numerous differences, even disagreements, the contributions on this subject outline some general requirements. There are justifications, and these are justification and empirical verification. The approach that follows from the perspective outlined in this paper differs from the example. As has been indicated earlier, the combinatorial power of what distinguishes one level is what distinguishes one level of organization of reality from another. Therefore, we can use combinatorial power, or in other words, inclusiveness, as one important criterion for validating knowledge. The more inclusive a decision, an approach, or a theory is, the greater is its combinatorial capacity, and therefore the greater its. Legitimate disagreements should not trigger power struggle, where one perspective seeks to delegitimize and eliminate another. Rather, they should motivate the creation of a new and more inclusive level of organization that would dissolve current dissonance. This new level have sufficient power to incorporate all competing points of view, including one's own, as particular cases of such a comprehensive whole. Such approach will stand in stark contrast to the dominant current practice of knowledge production and decision making that is based on consensuses and exclusion of difference. Hierarchies seek control over knowledge production, decision making, and silence control over funding, exposure, publishing, appointments. Simply brute force provide ample opportunities to enforce orthodoxy. More often than not, knowledge production turns into an exercise power. We can no longer afford a system of validation depends on conformity and access to power. An efficient, democratic, and open system of knowledge production and decision making should be based on a better understanding of what constitutes knowledge and how it is produced. Such system requires the institutionalization of more open, inclusive, democratic, and ultimately more rational practices, validating knowledge and allocating. As has been stated earlier, the more inclusive a knowledge system is, the more extensive is its combinatorial capacity, the more powerful it is. Inclusiveness and power, the Gödelian sense, not conformity to dominate, but to dominant trend, should be the most important criterion in the assessing knowledge. Critical awareness and introspection is another important criteria. We often pay lip service to critical judgment and just as often forget that critical judgment concerns, first and foremost, our capacity to examine critically our own premises, our own organizing, our own self evident. We should exercise a conscious and deliberate control over our own truths and our own truths and unconscious biases, rather than allow old and tired ideas that hinder knowledge production to dominate. Critical awareness is essential for the efficiency of knowledge production. Decisions we make, be they about managing our enterprises, organizations, governments, should always be guided by one and only one consideration. They should be always focused on the continued evolution of the process of creation, new and more powerful levels of and forms of organization. Our decisions cannot be based on control derived from authority of a hierarchy. Such approach hardly right. There is only one source of power for us humans, and that is the new and more powerful ways in which we can organize, including our own mind. The organization of human systems, including our civilization, the structure of our public space should reflect this. The above describes only some of the aspects of the realization of the Enlightenment project. We can realize this project only by going beyond the Enlightenment. This paper has only touched on this rich subject, only touched on this rich subject of internal complexity. We're still at a very beginning of the path that leads to the implementation of this grandiose task. As we advance along this path, we will encounter many problems, identify new issues, and offer new solutions. As this paper has argued, the project of the Enlightenment is, by definition, by the very fact that it must be based on inclusion, cannot be the work of one individual or even a group of individuals. It must involve the entire human race.